No one in the ballroom imagined that a single sentence, sharp as a blade of crystal, could make 1,000 glittering lights collapse into absolute silence. But that night, in the most extravagant gala in Manhattan, cruelty dressed in glamour delivered the opening blow to what would become the greatest downfall in New York high society. Beneath the soaring crystal ceiling, the string quartet was playing a slow, serene piece, as if the world were at peace. But that peace lasted only 3 breaths before Victoria Langford spoke. "Who allowed you in here?" Her voice rang out with the cold edge of metal striking stone, slicing through the laughter, through the clinking of crystal glasses, through the arrogance that hovered like perfume over Manhattan's elites. Every gaze snapped toward the woman in the bronze satin gown seated at the center of the VIP section, a place normally reserved for people who could buy a skyscraper if they felt like it. That woman, Maya Carter, didn't stand, didn't turn, didn't even tighten a brow. She simply lifted her eyes calm in a way that sent a shiver through the room. The entire ballroom seemed to freeze, as if time itself had been forced to kneel. A waiter stopped mid-pour. A major donor forced a stiff smile. A few guests even raised their phones, driven by the cruel instinct to capture another person's humiliation. Victoria took half a step forward, the spotlight catching her blue silk gown and turning her into the center of a stage no one asked for. "I will ask again, who gave you permission to sit at this table?" Her tone was velvet layered over thorns, spoken with the kind of entitlement that came from a lifetime untouched by rejection. At the head of the table, Edward Langford, Victoria's father, and the founder of Langford Holdings, adjusted his diplomatic smile. Beneath it, a flicker of unease stirred an odd certainty that tonight would not be like any gala he had ever hosted. In perfect contrast to Victoria, Maya didn't move. Her eyes drifted upward from the table, as if granting the entire room a moment to recognize the absurdity of what they were witnessing. But what shook the audience was not her silence. It was the power beneath that silence, a quiet, unyielding certainty that made people unconsciously lean back. Guests nearby began whispering, "Maybe she's staff. No, look at the way she sits." But who would invite someone like that to the donor table? Their words threaded through the ballroom, like cold wind slicing through fabric. Victoria lowered her voice, sweet, yet acidic. "This area is for people who write checks, not people who carry them, understood?" A few people laughed. A few pretended not to hear. But everyone could see it clearly. Maya Carter was being pushed to the edge of a public humiliation. And then Maya spoke. "I didn't realize dignity required permission," she said it softly, so soft it made people tilt their heads to hear. Yet it landed, like a bell ringing through a cathedral. Laughter died instantly. Victoria blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. An elderly magnate beside her dropped his silver fork, the clang ringing out like a warning. "What did you just say?" Victoria demanded, her voice no longer as steady. Maya held her gaze unwavering. "I said I am sitting exactly where I was invited." For a moment that felt unreal. Victoria's pride, the kind molded by wealth, praise, and lifelong obedience from others, slammed straight into a woman she had never considered her equal. At the far end of the table, Edward looked at Maya longer than necessary. Something about her composure, her self-possession, her refusal to shrink, sent a chill down his spine. Not because she raised her voice, because she didn't need to. Chaos bloomed. Guests stood. Phones lifted higher. Chairs scraped across marble floors as people shifted to see better. This glittering crowd was no longer attending a charity gala. They were spectators at a trial Maya never asked for. but had been forced into. Victoria's hand trembled, barely concealed by her martini glass. She snapped security escort her out. 2 guards stepped forward, but after a few steps they stopped, not because of Victoria, but because of Maya's eyes, steady and unnervingly calm, watching them as if waiting for their next move, not hers. It felt bizarrely as if she were the one deciding what happened next. In the distance, the orchestra attempted to resume playing, but every note wavered like it had lost its way in the dark. No one in that room knew that this moment, a small humiliation in the world of the wealthy, would spark a collapse worth $3 billion in only a few hours. But one man knew. Edward. He sensed it in her quiet calculation, in her impossible confidence, in the way she needed no argument, no apology, no submission. Her silence was dangerous, and in a single heartbeat he understood tonight power in this room didn't belong to the Langfords, not to Victoria, not to the guests holding their cameras. It belonged to the woman they had just insulted. The woman unmoved by the arrogance of Manhattan's elite. The woman whose eyes suggested she carried a truth the room was not prepared to hear. But they would hear it. Very soon. And when the truth landed, this gala would no longer be a fundraiser. It would become the night a legend was written. The first crack in the crystal had formed, and no one realized that fracture began with a whisper of a sentence. No one except Maya, and she was counting. The air in the ballroom felt heavy, like a layer of golden dust settling over the vintage chandeliers, as if the room itself understood that it was witnessing something too big, too dangerous to overlook. Every gaze fixed on Maya Carter, but no longer with the disdain from earlier. Instead, confusion, hesitation, and a deep instinct told them this woman was not simply an out-of-place guest. She was too calm, too composed, too certain. It was not the posture of someone being humiliated. It was the posture of someone watching another person dig their own grave without realizing they were holding the shovel. Victoria Langford remained standing, her face flushed with anger, with indignation, with the pain of being challenged by someone she was convinced did not belong to her class. She tightened her grip on her martini glass, a tiny movement that cracked the polished veneer of her entitlement and revealed the anxiety simmering beneath. "I will ask one last time," Victoria said, her voice dropping each word like shards of shattered crystal. "Who exactly invited you to this area?" Maya met her gaze, unblinking, unflinching, her silence sharp as a diamond blade. "The person who has the authority to invite me." 4 simple words, clipped and clean, yet they sent a ripple of cold through the ballroom. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, as if the entire power structure of the Langford family was nothing but a thin door, and she was standing behind it, hand already on the lock. A businessman nearby leaned toward his friend, whispering as if afraid to be overheard. "She said that like she is the one who owns the room?" The friend replied, voice trembling. "I have no idea who she is, but I would not bet on Victoria winning this." Victoria saw those glances, and they made her furious. To be doubted at her own event, to feel the room's curiosity shifting away from her, and toward this stranger to sense fear and fascination blending in the air, Victoria became even more determined to shove Maya back into the lower place she believed Maya belonged. "Security," she shouted this time, losing any attempt to mask the panic in her tone. 2 tall guards moved quickly, but when they neared Maya, something made them hesitate. One swallowed hard, the other glanced toward Edward, as if asking for permission to continue. But Edward, the true power of the family, was not listening. He was staring at Maya, studying every subtle movement. And what troubled him was not her poise, but something he recognized too late a familiarity. He had seen eyes like hers before, though he could not remember where. Eyes that belonged to someone who held the answers. Eyes that belonged to someone standing on ground far more solid than anyone else in this ballroom. The whispers began to shift in tone. At first, they carried curiosity and a bit of amusement. Now they carried dread. A major donor murmured, "Edward, do you know who she is?" Another businessman replied, "I have never seen anyone stare down a Langford like that. Look at her. She's not afraid. Maybe she is married to someone powerful." No, that is not it. She is not trying to prove herself. She is waiting for what I do not know. But whatever it is, it makes me uneasy. Maya felt every gaze on her, the scrutiny, the suspicion, the fear forming beneath the surface. But she revealed nothing. Inside, everything was still like the surface of a lake, moments before a storm. And it was precisely that stillness that made the entire room start to tremble. Victoria stepped forward, trying desperately to regain control. "Fine," she hissed, voice sharp as breaking ice. "If you will not answer, then I will have you." Maya cut her off. Not with words, but with a gesture. She placed her napkin on the table, softly, slowly. Yet the sound of the fabric touching the table rang out like destiny knocking. The ballroom held its breath. Maya lifted her head, her eyes calm like a sky darkening before thunder. "If disrespect is delivered publicly," she said, "then the correction must also be public." A few people shivered. A few sat up straighter, cold sweat forming down their spines. Nothing in her voice was threatening, and yet the pressure beneath it was immense, like an inevitable truth rising to the surface. And at that moment, Edward Langford, a titan who had faced every major financial crisis of his era, felt his heart drop. He understood not with logic, but with the primal instinct of someone who had witnessed real power before that Maya Carter was not a random guest, not someone who slipped in unnoticed, not an opportunist. She was someone he should have known. Dear God, he should have known. At a nearby table, a charity staffer glanced down at her phone. The screen lit her face, a blinding white. She gasped so loud she nearly dropped the device. "Oh my God," her friend whispered. "What is it?" "There is some kind of financial movement involving Langford Holdings. Right now, while the gala is happening." At the head of the table, Edward's phone buzzed with an urgent notification from his private bank. He opened it, and the moment he read the message, his face drained of color. His breath caught. Victoria noticed her father's expression collapse and grabbed his arm. "Father, what is it?" "Do not tell me." Edward did not answer immediately. He murmured almost to himself like a man who had just seen the shape of ruin. "It is not her fault, Victoria. It is ours." Victoria staggered back. "What are you talking about?" But Edward did not speak again, because at that exact moment Maya Carter tapped her phone. Just a single tap. But it shifted something invisible, something structural, something catastrophic. The room seemed to grow colder, as if winter air from Fifth Avenue had swept inside. Maya inhaled slowly, still composed, still elegant, and then lifted her gaze to the extravagant ballroom, which now felt oddly small around her. Her eyes said everything without a sound. The performance is over. Now comes the truth, and truth does not need to shout. The violinists hit a wrong note, a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the ballroom like a warning siren. People still did not understand that they had just witnessed the moment an empire began to crack from within. Not from scandal, not from the media, but from the unbreakable silence of a woman they had tried to humiliate. And in that second power shifted, not toward the Langfords, but toward Maya Carter, who had not even stood up yet, now commanded fear from an entire billionaire family on their own turf. Someone whispered, "My God, who is she?" And another voice, low but trembling with intuition, replied, "She is someone all of us should have known." The heartbeat of the ballroom faltered, and from that moment no one saw the gala as a charity event anymore. They were witnessing something else, a movement, a warning, a storm before the wind. Maya blinked once, slow and steady, and that single blink was the beginning of everything. Within a few hours, the entire city would know her name. The entire world would know. And the Langford dynasty, once thought untouchable, would learn that sometimes power does not lie in the shout, but in the silence that knows exactly when to break. No one in the ballroom realized the exact moment when true power shifted, but if someone were to replay the entire scene in slow motion, they would see it clearly. It began when the violinist's bow trembled for half a heartbeat, slipping out of a melody that had been flowing as smoothly as expensive wine. A tiny mistake, almost meaningless. But in rooms where power reigns, even the slightest irregularity is a warning. And that night, the warning came from the smallest thing. Victoria Langford didn't see it. Her pride blinded her, making her believe every gaze in the room was on her, because she was strong, because she was powerful, because she had put someone back in their place. But in reality, the looks in the room had begun to change. Curiosity turned into unease, unease into caution, and caution into a quiet, rising fear. And none of it was directed at Victoria. It was directed at Maya Carter. Maya had not stood up, had not protested, had not pushed back. But her calmness, unsettling in its intensity, like a fault line about to split open, told everyone that they had just touched something they should never have touched. When the security guard took one more step toward her, what stopped him was not Victoria's command. It was Edward Langford's eyes. Edward, the man who had survived the financial crises of past decades. The man who understood the market not through textbooks, but through the scent of fear, had noticed what everyone else missed. Maya's silence was not the silence of the powerless. It was the silence of someone capable of moving mountains. He did not know who she was, but he knew he had made a mistake. "Enough!" "Victoria," Edward said, his voice dropping low caution, tightening every syllable. "We do not need to make this bigger than it already is." But Victoria, still obsessed with appearances, convinced that her father was simply protecting the family's image, not realizing he was trying to protect their very existence, snapped back instantly. "Father, you must be joking. Someone like her dares to sit at the donor table. If I do not handle this, everyone here will think the Langfords let just anyone walk in. Victoria, listen to me. No." She cut him off her hand, crushing the stem of her glass as if she wanted to shatter the crystal. "I will not let someone like that embarrass our family." The phrase "someone like that" fell like a stone. It hit the air around them. It hit the faces of the servers trying to avoid her gaze, and it hit the ears of those who understood that social hierarchy never truly disappears. It is merely disguised as etiquette. But when the words reached Maya, they did not hurt her. They simply confirmed what she had known from the moment she walked into the gala. The arrogance of the wealthy could rot from the inside while still smelling like expensive perfume. Maya placed a single finger on the table, steadying the world around her. Not because she was anxious, but because she was holding back her own power, a power that, if released too soon, could destroy everything in seconds. "If you do not stand up," Victoria growled, "I will have you dragged out." Maya lifted her chin, her eyes unblinking. "You have no idea who you are speaking to," she said, her voice flowing like cold water over stone. A sharp breath escaped someone nearby. A donor whispered, "She is not a normal woman." Obviously the man beside him muttered, but Victoria is too foolish to see it. Victoria heard it. Her face paled, then flushed red with anger. Soft leather chairs or crystal decor could not hide the moment a privileged woman's illusion of power began to crack. "What right do you have to speak to me like that?" Victoria spat. "You are just Maya cut in. I am the person you will remember tonight for the rest of your life." Her voice was not loud, but the weight of it felt like a sentence being handed down. At the head of the table, Edward rose to his feet. He felt as though he was witnessing a miniature version of a market collapse. The earliest signs were always the same, an unnatural silence, a tension in the air waiting for a single trigger. And that trigger came from his phone. A sharp chime. He glanced down at the screen. The words he least wanted to see appeared: liquidity partner, reviewing all agreements. Immediate concern. Call as soon as possible. His heart seemed to stop. He did not need more than a second to understand the horror of it. The woman his daughter was humiliating might be the very person who controlled the flow of money, keeping his family from slipping into bankruptcy. Victoria saw his expression crumble and panicked. "Father, what is it?" But Edward could not answer. He could only stare at Maya. A stare filled with dawning terror, a stare that recognized the true shape of the threat before him. Maya felt that stare, and for a fleeting moment, only a moment, she felt pity. The truth was simple. This man had lived too long inside the illusion of power, never realizing that real power does not demand attention. It waits for the right moment. Victoria did not wait. She lunged half a step forward, pointing directly at Maya. "If security cannot do it, I will throw you out myself." A few gasps broke through the room. The violinists dropped their bow. Servers stepped back. Footsteps scattered. All sound seemed to be swallowed by an invisible void. And in that exact moment, Maya finally smiled. A small, quiet smile, but one that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Throw out who?" Maya asked, tilting her head gently. "Are you sure?" Victoria trembled. "Do not challenge me." "I am not challenging you," Maya replied. "I am asking if you even know what you are doing." And then Maya's phone vibrated, just once. But in the tension of the ballroom, it sounded louder than a gunshot. She looked down, a single message ready to execute, awaiting final command, from Lauren Mitchell. The president of Langford Holdings stared at Maya's phone, as if he had just seen the gates of doom crack open. Victoria understood none of it, but she sensed that the room was afraid of something, and the fear itself terrified her. "What are you doing? You cannot—" "I can," Maya said, her voice low, but carrying unmistakable authority. "And one more word from you, and everything your family owns will begin to fall." Victoria froze. Her lips trembled. People around them stepped back, as if terrified of being too close to a storm gathering strength. "Silence," Maya said, her gaze cold as a winter lake, "is not weakness. It is a countdown." And at that exact second, The chandeliers quivered, a sign, a warning, as if Manhattan itself understood that tonight an empire was beginning to break from the inside right before their eyes. Maya set her phone down, softly, but the sound hit the marble floor like a drill-piercing stone. True power does not need noise. It only needs the right moment to strike. And that moment had arrived. In the moment every gaze locked onto Maya Carter, the opulent hall of the Park View Grand Hotel suddenly felt too small for all the whispers, doubts, and invisible shivers weaving through the rows of gold-lined chairs. But anyone who believed Maya's calm came from being accustomed to rooms like this would be wrong. Her calm had been forged by a life carved out of poverty, shaped by anger and hardened by intellect. A life Victoria Langford, or anyone else in this room, could never begin to imagine. Because before she walked into the world of the elite, before she commanded the flow of capital worth billions, before she became the name that made Wall Street tread carefully, Maya was just a girl from southwest Atlanta, a place where no one knew the taste of imported champagne, the feel of silk gowns, or the glamour of charity galas. There nightfall meant the sound of police helicopters, the flicker of neon signs dying above closing shops, and the sight of her mother returning from a late shift shirt soaked with sweat, and the smell of bleach lingering around her wrists. But in that harsh world, Maya had one light, her grandmother, Grace Carter. A small but unbreakable woman who understood what it meant to be underestimated because of her skin, her voice, her zip code. She was the first person to teach Maya that silence was not submission, but the surest way to force others to reveal themselves. When they looked down on you, she would say, her voice low and steady, "Do not argue. Do not shout. Let them speak one more sentence. Each sentence is a step lifting you higher." Maya never forgot. Grace taught her a second lesson, one that remains etched in the silver bracelet around Maya's wrist. When they do not expect, you do not announce yourself. Just appear. Maya first appeared on the financial map, not with a media explosion or a glossy Forbes feature. She appeared through the disappearance of companies everyone thought were beyond saving. She appeared when CEOs who only knew how to burn cash found themselves whispering her name in emergency boardrooms. She appeared when investors needed capital from a source they could not trace. She appeared quietly, cleanly, precisely like a scalpel, cutting through the excess fat of greedy corporations. And then she vanished, leaving behind a healthier company, a cleaner balance sheet, a steadier market. That was why the industry gave her a name, the Silent Architect. But long before Maya became the woman who made Wall Street tremble, she had been an underestimated prodigy. At 17, she graduated high school 2 years early, yet no one believed she could do more than pursue accounting or a normal business program. Her career counselor told her, financial programs require strong analytical thinking. Be realistic. Maya only bowed her head, thanked him, and said nothing. On the walk home, Grace held her hand and said, "People often mistake silence for surrender, but your silence is preparation." By 20, during her internship at an investment firm in Midtown Manhattan, she sat through meetings where older white men smiled politely, yet constantly re-explained the analysis she had already presented. She did not argue. She took notes. Not about stocks, about people. Because Maya learned early that the market is driven by people. The fearful, the greedy, the insecure, the ambitious. She made her own list, which CEO panicked under pressure, which CFO leaned defensive, Which investor was swayed more by headlines than numbers? And from those observations, she built a model most people overlooked, a model that measured the emotional heartbeat of the market, not just its charts. By 28, Maya founded Carter Global Capital and began attracting companies on the brink of collapse, but still salvageable. She did not demand control nor a board seat. She asked for one thing: full authority when necessary, and she never took action when the market was watching. She only acted when the market slept. That was how she saved 3 major corporations in 2 years, forcing the same men who once mocked her to sign agreements they would never admit to publicly. Because to admit it would mean acknowledging that the person who saved them was a 28-year-old black woman from a neighborhood they had never set foot in. That was why Maya rejected interviews, rejected the spotlight, rejected fame. Because true power does not live in light. It lives in the shadows. Every man who mocked her never knew that each dismissive comment only sharpened her, strengthened her, made her more dangerous. And then came the day Langford Holdings, the 3-generation empire of the Langford family, began leaking money, drowning in bad debt and failed bids. They sought help from an anonymous investor through an intermediary fund. They assumed it was backed by a European conglomerate. They assumed it was a group of seasoned male investors. They assumed it was a conservative institution with an old-world pedigree. They never imagined it was Carter Global Capital, and they certainly did not imagine that the person who signed the $3 billion liquidity package was the woman they had just humiliated in front of the ballroom. But Maya knew everything. She had read the guest list days before. She knew Victoria would be there. She knew Edward was scheduled to speak. She knew the gala would be coated in artificial grandeur. And still Maya came. Not to be acknowledged, not to be respected, but to prove a lesson Grace had spent her life teaching. The rooms that try to shut you out are the rooms you have the greatest right to walk into. When Maya sat at the donor table that night, she did not sit like a guest. She sat like the person who had paid for the room to exist. Some people sensed it, but far too late. And when Victoria pointed a finger in Maya's face and judged her as if she were the center of the universe, Maya felt only a brief flicker of sadness. Not sadness from being insulted, but sadness because Victoria had no idea her arrogance would destroy her entire family. Maya inhaled slowly, not to steady herself, but to prepare for what was coming, because at that moment, as the ballroom grew colder and Edward's phone vibrated non-stop, Maya felt Grace's voice echo once more. When you are silent, it means they are about to hear something important, and that important thing was coming. Fast, irreversible. In just a few minutes, the world would learn Maya Carter was not just a black woman humiliated at a gala. She was the silent architect of a $3 billion downfall, and it all began where she was born, in the neighborhoods, where people learn that silence is the most dangerous form of strength. No one in the Langford family realized that the moment Victoria Langford pointed at Maya Carter and called her someone like that, in that exact instant, their 3-generation empire had already begun to crack like glass struck at its weakest point. But before the collapse could unfold, we have to look deeper at what had been rotting for years beneath the polished surface they were so proud to display. Langford Holdings, an empire of real estate finance and infrastructure development, was built in the time of Edward Langford's grandfather, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands who knew what it meant to work until you could barely breathe. He turned a few empty lots in Manhattan into the family's first towers, and no one could deny that glory. But with each new generation, they drifted a little further from reality, added a little more indulgence, a little more arrogance. By the time it reached Edward's generation, the entire legacy had turned into a castle drawn on sand. To outsiders, Edward Langford, at 65 years old, was the picture of a Manhattan gentleman: tailored suits, a calm voice, a firm handshake, a polite smile, just strong enough to hide the cracks of worry beneath. But to the banks of Wall Street, Edward was not a symbol of stability. He was the symbol of a financial report drowned in red from a wall of maturing loans, red from a portfolio full of risky bets, red from unprofitable projects he kept pouring money into just to protect his pride. At dinners with major investors, he spoke of vision, of restructuring, of bold plans for the future. Yet in private meetings, those same investors whispered among themselves that Langford Holdings had exactly one last chance, left a $3 billion liquidity package from an unnamed partner. And if that package was pulled, Edward knew exactly what would happen. What he did not know was that the woman sitting right in front of him tonight, the woman his daughter had just tried to humiliate, was the owner of that capital. Margaret Langford, his wife, 61 years old, was another symbol of hollow glamour. She organized dozens of galas every year, handed out scholarships, made donations, posed for photos with a perfect smile, yet could not remember the name of a single child on her sponsorship lists. To her, charity was a stage, not a responsibility. And at tonight's gala, Margaret sat there, adjusting a diamond brooch as large as a confession, trying to hold her posture together as she watched the color drain from Edward's face like a man losing blood. Beside her, their eldest daughter, 31-year-old Victoria Langford, was the embodiment of a generation born on cushions and raised inside a bubble of delusion. She believed power meant speaking louder, looking down on others entering a room before everyone else. She had never truly had to work for anything and had never heard the word no. That arrogance was the spark about to touch the leaking fuel tank of the Langford empire. Her younger brother, 29-year-old Lucas Langford, sat a few seats away, swirling his red wine with the boredom of someone who had never learned how the world actually worked beyond all night parties. He did not understand what was happening, did not understand the panic in his father's eyes, and certainly did not understand that the quiet woman at the center of it all had the power to wipe out everything he was meant to inherit with a single message. Around them, the tables reserved for top donors buzzed with whispers no one even bothered to hide anymore. At first, they had thought this was just social drama, a woman who crossed a line being put in place by a rich heiress. But the more they looked at Maya, the more they watched Edward's expression, the clearer it became. No one in the Langford family had any right to put her in place. An older man, owner of a large chain of private hospitals, leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Look at her eyes. Those are not the eyes of someone who is losing. Those are the eyes of someone waiting for a signal." His wife answered, her voice shaking. "Who do you think she is?" He shook his head. "I do not know, but she is definitely not someone you insult." At the next table, a businesswoman shivered as she saw Edward open his phone again, and this time his hand was shaking for real, no longer hidden. He read a message from a partner bank. Credit lines require immediate review. Major movement. Urgent. No one knew the exact wording, but everyone could feel something shifting in his eyes. A young server who had just set down champagne glasses instinctively took a few steps back. He did not understand the situation, but he could feel some invisible pressure bearing down on the room. And Victoria, she noticed none of it. All she knew was that her ego had been challenged, her pride had been wounded, and she needed to win a battle whose rules she did not understand. "Father." She leaned in and hissed impatiently. "What are you doing? You are letting her make the whole room look down on us." Edward stayed silent, not because he did not know what to say, but because he was struggling just to breathe. He felt like he was standing at the very edge of a cliff he had spent years pretending was not there. Then Edward Langford looked directly at Maya, truly looked at her for the first time with the seriousness of a man who recognizes the early signs of financial collapse. What he saw in her eyes was not anger, not a thirst for revenge. It was the calm of someone who had planned all of this in advance. The calm of someone who knew she held the strongest card at the table. The calm of someone who did not need to attack, only needed to wait for the other side to fall on their own. A cold wave of fear slid down his spine as he realized that if Maya was who he suspected she might be, his family had insulted the wrong person. And the price would not be measured in apologies, but in numbers terrifying enough to make all of Wall Street shudder. Margaret finally began to feel something was truly wrong when her husband's silence stretched too long. "Edward," she said, placing a hand over his "Are you all right?" But before Edward could answer, a phone buzzed loudly at their table, making everyone jump. A financial journalist checked her notifications and froze her mouth, falling open. Her husband leaned in. "What is it?" she stammered. "Langford Holdings, there is an emergency notice. Liquidity issues during the gala. Right now." Meanwhile, Lucas Langford scoffed. "Everyone is overreacting. It is probably just a system glitch. You all worry too much." But Margaret sensed something deeper. When Edward went quiet, it was never a small matter. When Edward's hand shook, it meant the matter was grave. When Edward was afraid, it meant the situation was beyond saving. Across the room, Maya Carter remained seated. No raised eyebrows, no smirk, no sign of triumph. Yet her silence felt like a black hole swallowing every sound, every stare, every carefully constructed mask on the faces of the Langford family. Victoria felt like she could not breathe, but instead of stepping back, she did the only foolish thing she knew how to do: attack harder to bury her fear. "Do you even know where you are?" she snapped, clinging to her arrogance. "This is my family's gala." "You have no right." Maya looked up, a slow, piercing gaze that cut straight through. "You are right," Maya said softly. "I have no rights in this gala." Victoria let out a sharp, smug laugh. "At least you understand. But I do have rights in a place you cannot reach," Maya continued. "A place where a single sentence from me can erase everything your family owns." The crowded room suddenly felt as cold as a vault. Some people stood up. Some gripped their phones tighter. Some looked at Victoria with pity, and some of them understood everything. Because they knew a brutal truth: the quietest people are always the ones who can extinguish an entire empire without ever leaving their seat. And right then, before Victoria could even respond, Edward Langford set his hand on the table like a man who had been drained of all strength. "Victoria," he said, his voice hoarse. "Stop." Victoria turned to him, stunned, confused. Father Edward did not look at his daughter. He only looked at Maya, his eyes full of acknowledgement, full of terror, full of regret. Because the man who had once commanded billions had finally realized one thing: the Langford family had just insulted the most powerful investor they had ever had. And Maya was only getting started. The moment Edward Langford placed his hand on the table and told Victoria to stop, the atmosphere in the ballroom sank into a strange kind of silence, not the silence of respect, and not the silence of shame. It was the silence of something drawing closer, very close, like the sound of an undercurrent beneath the surface of the sea just before it smashes into the seawall. The guests were still trying to appear composed, but their eyes betrayed everything, an unnamed fear spreading like smoke through the gold-plated space. The scent of expensive perfume, the smell of freshly pressed tablecloths, the bite of red wine not yet sipped, all of it blended into the dim heaviness, turning the ballroom into something suffocating like a theatre about to witness a scene no one wanted to see. And at the center of all that tension was Maya Carter, the woman still sitting upright, not turning one hand, resting lightly on the table, as if even time itself belonged to her. Not a single wasted movement, not a single uneven breath, yet her stillness was like a magnet, pulling every glance, every unease, every worst premonition toward her. Meanwhile, Victoria Langford, proud, hot-headed, more accustomed to giving orders than enduring anything, had no idea what was actually happening. She stared at her father, caught between outrage and confusion. "Are you taking her side? Do you even know who she is?" Edward didn't answer. He could not, because his phone had just buzzed for the third time in 5 minutes, and every vibration was another knife slicing deeper into the truth he had been avoiding for months. The first message: liquidity is shifting. Immediate verification required. The second message: the $3 billion disbursement is under review. The third, the newest, the most terrifying investment partner, showing unclear activity. We cannot reach them. In his shallow breaths, Edward looked at Maya and knew instantly this was not coincidence. This was not bad luck. This was her hand. No more precisely, this was the hand of the person who held the power he once believed was invisible. Maya gently placed her own phone on the table, a tiny motion that sounded louder than the violin's earlier misstep. The screen lit up for a brief second, like a flash of steel. Those seated closest caught a glimpse of a line of text: Lauren Mitchell Carter, Global Capital. An older man jolted, whispering, "Lauren Mitchell, the Chief Financial Officer of Carter Global. Then she is. That is impossible." Someone else gasped, but they all knew, in the world of high finance, nothing was impossible. Maya lifted the phone. Just that small gesture made the entire room seem to shiver. Those standing nearby swore the air itself changed temperature, like winter mist sliding over the marble floor. Victoria felt something slipping out of her control. She stepped back half a pace, and for the first time that evening she felt her palms slick with sweat. What are you doing?" Maya looked directly into Victoria's eyes, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the gaze of someone deciding whether to let go or to press the kill switch. It was the kind of gaze no one ever wanted aimed at them. Then Maya raised the phone to her ear. "Lauren," she said, her voice low and smooth like steel that had been tempered to perfection. "Proceed." A beat of silence followed. In that silence, Victoria clapped a hand over her mouth as she realized she had just lit the fuse to something she did not understand. And Edward, he floundered like a man watching his entire empire slide out of his grasp, with no way to stop it. Confirm Lauren Mitchell's voice came through the phone, sharp and precise like a military command. "We are talking about everything." Maya looked around the room, at the extravagant dresses, at the polished artificial smiles, at the eyes that had been filled with contempt only moments before, at the people who had filmed earlier for the thrill of watching someone weaker be torn down. at those who genuinely believed they could never be touched. Her words fell softly, but as sharp as the thinnest blade. Everything. One sentence. Just one. But it was enough to make a billionaire step back, one hand clutching his chest. When Maya set her phone down, the gentle tap against the table sounded like the opening siren of a financial war. No one understood the mechanisms, but everyone understood one thing. Whatever had just happened was huge. And then, in less than 30 seconds, phones all around the ballroom began to buzz and ring like a swarm of bees bursting out of a hive. Investors received alerts. Accounts were frozen. Charity funds were locked. Projects were suspended. Trades were halted. People whispered, "What is going on? Is the market crashing?" No, this is not the market. This is... A young businessman's jaw dropped. This is withdrawal. Total withdrawal. Across the table, Lucas Langford had lost his bored expression. His face had gone pale. "Father, what is happening?" Our family name is Edward did not look at his son. He was staring at Maya, and in a trembling voice he asked, "Who are you?" Maya tilted her head slightly. A small movement, but carrying the weight of absolute control. "I am the person who has been keeping your family from going bankrupt for the past 6 months." The room went dead still. Victoria staggered back, her spine hitting the chair, her martini glass slipping from her hand and shattering the broken glass, sounding like her heart dropping into her stomach. Edward choked on his own words. "No, that is not possible. Our partner is your partner." Maya said, evenly cutting in, "is the Carter Global Capital Fund. And Carter Global is me." It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. People stared at each other, too stunned to even blink. A young woman whispered, "So that is the mysterious investor behind Langford." A man beside her answered, his voice hoarse. "Not mysterious anymore. That is a nightmare." Maya slowly turned to look at Victoria. There was no malice in her eyes, no gloating, no revenge, only the detached certainty of someone who knew the outcome was already sealed. "You said I did not deserve to sit at this table," Maya said. "But my money is what paid for this entire room to function tonight." Victoria shook her head, her face drained of all color. "No, that is not possible." And now Maya continued, "My money will stop paying." In less than 1 minute after those words, the automated systems of the financial world reacted. Phones began flashing error messages, access denied and transaction declined. Alerts flooded screens. Langford Holdings stock turned blood red across international exchanges. One donor cried out, "My God, Langford stock just got suspended from trading." Another stammered, "My retirement fund, it is tied to Langford." Dear God. Whispers erupted into chaos. Chaos swelled into panic. Panic hardened into an undeniable truth. The Langford empire was collapsing right in the middle of the very gala meant to showcase their power. Edward could barely remain standing. He clung to the edge of the table, fighting to keep his voice steady. You cannot do this to my family." Maya looked at him, not with anger, not with joy, but with a softness that made her words even more terrifying. "I am not doing anything, Mr. Langford. I am simply removing my hand from the place where I once helped." Victoria gasped for air, scrambling for a reason, a way out, anything she could say to turn this around. But the only thing she had left was Maya's silence. The silence she had dismissed. The silence she had mocked. The silence she had called weakness. But tonight, in front of everyone, that silence had become the sharpest, most decisive blade in the room. And with a gesture as light as a breeze, Maya had sliced through the illusion of power the Langford family had built over 3 generations. No one in the room stood quite straight any more. No one dared to look at Maya as if she were beneath them, because now they understood her silence had always been the warning, and that warning had just become a sentence. There was only one truth left that everyone knew, yet no one dared to say out loud. The Langford Empire had officially begun to fall. Within minutes of that phone call, the ballroom of the Parkview Grand Hotel was no longer the site of a lavish charity event. It had transformed into a financial storm, erupting among tailored suits and couture gowns. The crystal chandeliers no longer reflected the sparkle of elegance. Instead, they cast a harsh light that exposed every panicked wrinkle, every shallow breath, every dawning realization that what was happening could not be undone. And at the center of that chaos, Maya Carter rose to her feet for the first time that night. She did not speak a word. She did not need to tell anyone to be silent. The simple act of her standing, unhurried, unshowy, was enough to make several people stop breathing altogether. The silence stretched a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest sound. Those who moments earlier had smirked when Victoria insulted Maya now lowered their heads, avoiding her eyes, as if a single glance from her could peel back their guilt. An older woman covered her mouth, tears welling with a fear she could not explain. A young businessman whispered to his friend, "This is not market volatility. This is an execution." At the head table, Victoria Langford stood, frozen, her hands trembling uncontrollably. From beginning to end, she had never understood that she had unleashed something she had no right to touch. She had believed power was the ability to shout at someone in front of hundreds of people. But now power stood directly before her in complete silence. And that silence was suffocating her. Did you really withdraw everything?" Victoria asked, her voice strangled by fear. Maya did not answer immediately. She only looked at her long enough for Victoria to feel a truth sink into her bones. She was no longer on the stage she thought she ruled. She was nothing more than a supporting character in the tragedy of her own family. And Maya was the one writing the script. At the next table, Edward Langford sank into his chair, his hand shaking as he opened the newest notifications. Trading suspended, credit lines frozen, capital outflow accelerating. Total assets under management down 27% in 45 minutes. He was no longer the confident man who had commanded a 3-generation empire. He was a defeated father watching his grandfather's legacy plummet into an abyss because of a mistake he had allowed his daughter to make. Frantic murmurs rippled across the ballroom. An investor made a call right at the table, his voice quivering. No, I do not know what is happening. Check the portfolio again. All Langford stock is halted." A woman stumbled backward, her hand clutching her chest. "My family's retirement fund is tied to them. Oh God, I invested everything." A young intern from a major bank stood against the wall, pale as paper. She just wiped out an entire corporation while still sitting at a gala. But what silenced the room was not their panic. It was Maya's cold, unwavering calm, like a storm that had finished its mission and now simply watched the aftermath. Her silence now felt more powerful than the financial earthquake rippling outside. She looked toward the center of the ballroom, at tables draped in white cloth, now covered in trembling fingerprints. "Everything happening right now," Maya said, her voice soft, yet slicing through the air like a blade, was not created by me. It was created by all of you. People gulped. A few nodded, terrified. No one dared to view Maya as the insulted victim anymore. She was the one speaking the truth no one wanted to hear. You think you can humiliate anyone just because your status is higher? Maya continued, her gaze fixed on Victoria, though her words were meant for everyone. But status is not what defines power. She paused just long enough for the words to settle into the hearts of those still trying to deny reality. Power is the ability to remain calm when everyone else loses theirs. The air in the room thickened. The cameras that had been raised earlier to record a humiliation still stayed up, but no one was thinking about views anymore. It felt as though they were documenting a historical moment, the moment an empire fell, not because of scandal, but because of its own arrogance. Maya turned to leave the ballroom. Her footsteps were light, yet they echoed farther than any music that had played that night. But before she crossed the doorway, she stopped. She did not turn around, did not look at anyone. She simply spoke one sentence, a sentence that stripped the room bare. You believed I did not deserve to be here. But the truth is, I never needed your approval. Just one sentence. But it made the entire room buckle under its weight. Victoria could not hold herself back anymore. She rushed forward half a step, desperate to cling to whatever scraps of authority she thought she still had. You cannot walk away like that. You cannot destroy my family. Maya stopped, slowly turned her head. Her eyes were gentle like a winter night, but behind that gentleness lay a blade Victoria never saw coming. Your family was not destroyed by me, Maya said. Your family destroyed itself with its own arrogance. An older woman burst into tears. Others bowed their heads. Margaret Langford covered her face with both hands, the hairstyle she had maintained perfectly all night, finally falling apart in despair. Edward Langford, a man who had once stood confidently on the grandest financial stages, who had been proud to uphold the Langford legacy for 3 generations, now looked nothing like a titan. He was simply a defeated, helpless, middle-aged man. His eyes met Maya's, pleading, terrified, and filled with bitter understanding. "Could you give us time?" he asked, his voice cracking. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were not as cold as the look she had given Victoria. There was a trace of regret, the kind reserved for people who once had a chance to do the right thing, but chose the wrong path. You already had time, Maya said. You had 6 months. Edward collapsed back into his chair, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of truth. Maya looked around the ballroom one last time, not to revel, not to savor victory, but to imprint the image of a room that once used its power to humiliate a black woman and was now being placed back into its rightful place by her true power. As Maya reached the doorway, the light from the hallway caught the edge of her satin gown, making it glow like burnished gold. It was as if she were stepping out of the world of pretenders and into the real world, where power belongs to those strong enough to hold it in silence. Victoria wanted to say something, wanted to scream, wanted to pull Maya back, but every word lodged in her throat. She could only watch Maya's silhouette grow smaller, and in that moment, Victoria understood it was not Maya who had left the gala. It was her own family left behind in the ruins they had created. The door closed, a soft click, gentle as a verdict. The Langford Gala had officially ended, and the woman they once dismissed had become the one rewriting the fate of an entire empire. When the ballroom doors closed behind Maya Carter, the silence that remained was not the silence of a party ending. It was the silence of people who had just watched the foundations of their world crack beneath their feet. Only minutes after Maya stepped out of the grand hall, phones across the room began vibrating so violently that guests had to steady them with both hands. They were no longer communication devices. They were alarm sirens announcing a financial earthquake spreading far beyond the hotel walls. On every screen, red alerts flashed non-stop: liquidity withdrawal, emergency halt margin, exposure uncovered Windsor, Langford Holdings in critical condition. Within 5 minutes, all transactions tied to Langford Holdings were frozen across 3 continents. News spread so quickly that the outside world knew sooner than the people sitting inside the gala. A group of guests turned pale as they looked at Twitter. Breaking Capital partner pulls $3 billion from Langford Holdings. A businessman jumped from his seat when his investment app reported, "Your portfolio is impacted." A top donor whispered, "My God, this is not drama. This is a collapse." At the front of the room, Edward Langford could barely hear anything except the thudding of his own heart. Each vibrating notification was another reminder that he had lost what his grandfather built with a lifetime of labor, and he had lost it not because of the market, but because of his family's arrogance on the very night he intended to show off their power. Victoria, who had always believed she was the center of every room she entered, now looked around and realized no one was looking at her with admiration or even attention. A cluster of reporters pointed their cameras at her, not to praise her dress, but to capture the face of the woman who had publicly humiliated her family's biggest investor. The click, click, click of cameras rattled through the air, making it feel hard for her to breathe. Some guests avoided her entirely. Others stared at her with quiet fury because their savings had just taken a hit, because their investment funds had just lost millions, and they knew the culprit was not Maya, but Victoria herself. Then a 34-second clip appeared online, filmed from 3 different angles, posted simultaneously by multiple guests, and within 3 minutes it exploded. Footage of Victoria pointing at Maya, her voice sharp. "You do not belong here." Footage of Maya sitting calmly, her eyes steady even as she was surrounded. Footage of Maya saying, "If disrespect is delivered publicly, the correction will be public as well." And finally footage of her rising and walking out of the ballroom, regal, as if the entire room bowed beneath her calm. The clip spread like a storm, climbing to 5 million views in 1 hour, then 20 million in 2 hours. Hashtags Respect Maya, 3 billion lesson and Carter effect flooded every social platform. People analyzed Victoria's expression, dissected every word Maya spoke, and replayed Edward's panic as he read his messages. Then came the most viral tweet of the night. She did not shout. She did not strike back. She simply withdrew what she gave. That is power. By 2 a.m, the entire American media landscape had erupted. CNBC reported Carter Global Capital withdraws $3 billion Langford empire in freefall. Fox News declared, "Gala gone wrong, silent investor, shakes Wall Street." CNN announced, "Woman humiliated at charity gala. Turns out to be the investor keeping the hosts alive." But the one person who said nothing about any of it was Maya Carter. While the whole country roared, while millions argued over who was right and who was wrong, while the Langford family scrambled like ants, trying to put out flames, Maya walked quietly along Fifth Avenue. No security, no entourage, only the sound of her heels tapping against the stone of the city, like a quiet affirmation that she had nothing to prove. The world had already proven it for her. And in that cold winter night, a truth settled softly into place Those who believed Maya did not belong at the VIP table had been entirely wrong. It was they who did not belong at the table where she sat. Maya kept walking. She did not look back. Because to her, the fall of an arrogant empire wasn't a victory. It was simply the consequence of truth. And truth, even when ignored or mocked, always finds its voice. In silence. But with thunder. Within just a few hours, Maya Carter went from someone who had been dismissed to the quiet symbol of a new kind of power. Financial analysts dissected every second of the viral clip business schools incorporated the incident into their lectures, and thousands of women of color posted messages saying, "This is for every door that ever closed in front of us." Meanwhile, the Langford family released a belated apology, but nothing could save the empire already burning to ash. And Maya remained silent, steady composed, as if she had never touched a billion-dollar dynasty at all, as if she had simply placed it back where it truly belonged. When everything finally settled, Maya quietly redirected the entire $3 billion she had pulled from Langford into the Grace Foundation, the fund named after her grandmother, dedicated to supporting education and economic ownership for women of color. No press conference, no grand announcement, just a single line, dignity reinvested. The world called it revenge. But Maya knew better. She had not retaliated, she had built. And while the Langford Empire collapsed into a cautionary tale, Maya's legacy opened new doors for those who had once been dismissed the same way she had been years ago. Viewed through the lens of a specialist, Maya Carter's story reveals a sharp truth. The greatest power does not belong to those who make the most noise, but to those who can command silence. In a world where arrogance often blinds, the powerful Maya proved that dignity and strategy can reshape the fate of an entire empire. If you found this story thought-provoking, remember to like and subscribe so we can continue bringing you meaningful lessons. And comment a phrase that represents this kind of strength. Silent strong.